A big welcome to the Young Hearts Run Free podcast. Dylan Bowman, how are you doing today?
John, Stephen, it's great to meet you both. I'm grateful for the invitation on the podcast. I'm doing great. I'm home for a couple of days after being on the road for the last month. I'm leaving this afternoon, as I told you before we started, to go to another race. That's going to be 4 races in 5 weeks for me. So we are in the whirlwind, in the thick of racing season, and I'm grateful that I'm able to experience it all in person.
We've been following your meanders around the country, the globe, on your socials lately, and yeah, you've had a heavy schedule and it continues to be so for you. So thank you for making time to chat to us in amongst that all. But John and I are super excited to get a chance to chew the fat with you, if you know what that term means, and find out all about who Dylan Bowman is, but also what you're up to, both in your media entrepreneurship and your own running as well. So yeah, John, we have a term, Dylan. We say we're up to high dough. It means that we're very super excited, beyond excited. High dough. It will be the first Scottish term, maybe not the last Scottish term that you'll hear over the next hour or so. First of all, Dylan, John and I, we get this sometimes. It's a bit of a weird one where people are really over familiar with us because they hear us every week in their ears, and it's almost like they speak to us more than sometimes, or they listen to us more than their own family. So I'm super familiar with you. John's super familiar with you, but some of our listeners will go, who's this Dylan Bowman character? So we like to find out a little bit about your background, let listeners know who Dylan Bowman is. Over to you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a self-proclaimed trail running evangelist. I think that's the most important and most clear and concise way to describe who I am and what I do. I've been a professional athlete in the sport for the last 15 years or so. I ran my first ultramarathon in 2008, and I've been hooked ever since and have been able to cultivate a lot of amazing memories, a lot of great experience in the sport, and most importantly, a lot of amazing relationships. All my closest friendships, now obviously a lot of business partnerships are cultivated in the sport of trail running with the great people who are involved in this amazing community. In the last 3.5 years, my attention has shifted from being a competitive athlete to starting my business called Free Trail, which I'm sure we can talk a little bit more about in the future. That is now sort of like a sprawling media and events company. We do a lot of podcasting, YouTube, newsletter, written publishing, race coverage. We own 2 events, so we're also race directors to some degree. And really what we do is try and spread the amazing message, the amazing energy, the amazing values and ethos of this sport. That's why I said I'm a trail running evangelist. I love the sport to the core, and I'm lucky to be able to develop a career in the space. So that's sort of me in a nutshell. Longtime professional athlete, more recently sort of making my living or making more of my impact in the sport on the media side of things. We have a sort of a large global audience, but definitely, I think majority North American. So this is a great opportunity to speak to the Scottish trail runners in the world. And I'm grateful that you guys would give me that opportunity. But that's a quick introduction to who I am, what I do.
The first self-proclaimed evangelist. I like that. We've got a trio of evangelists now. Here we are. I love that very much. And 2008, I hadn't even heard of ultramarathons in 2008. What was your first one, Dylan?
My first one was the Silver Rush 50 miler in Leadville, Colorado. So the shorter version of the story is that I played a field sport in college that's popular here in the US, probably less so in Scotland, called lacrosse. Have you guys ever heard of the sport of lacrosse?
Yeah.
So yeah, I played that in college, and afterwards I sort of was living in the small mountain town of Aspen, Colorado, and felt a little bit lost in life. I'd always been an athlete growing up. And after I graduated, it was the first time where I didn't have the structure of going to practice every day, working on athletic skills, and feeling uncomfortable in those circumstances. Ultimately, I just started running. And because I was living in Aspen, I started running in the mountains. And shortly thereafter, I learned about the Leadville 100. I ran the Leadville 50 miler first, knowing that the Leadville 100 was going to be my goal. And so, yeah, I read the Leadville Silver Rush 50 miler in 2008.
Cool. I'm just looking at your DUV site, and you went on and had a bash at the Leadville 100, didn't you? You did all right there. Good bit of history there as well. There's so many great events, and you've featured in a lot of the American ones that have fascinated Stephen and I for quite a long time. We do have a dream to get there one day. And as you said, we're right in the middle of race season, and this time of year, and it's really, really exciting. And as Stephen said, it's almost been like you've got a tour bus or a tour plane or something. You seem to be at these exotic places, the dream stuff for Stephen and I. What's it like, though? I suppose you're still transitioning because you're still running. You did the Mozart event earlier this year. You're still running. What's the transition? Was it a planned transition into free trail? When did free trail come about?
So the first podcast that I published, I think, was December of 2019. So we're, I guess, coming up on the 5-year anniversary of that, which is crazy. Initially, the podcast was just meant to be a fun, creative project. I was coming off of a serious injury in 2019. And then obviously in 2020, the world came to a screeching halt with COVID. So in that sense, it was fortunate timing because I had time on my hands. I was kind of looking for a new creative outlet. In addition to my professional athletic career, I always kept a job on the side also. And it was coming to a point where I had been there for 9 years. It's a company that I really enjoyed working at and with people who I really loved. But after 9 years, I was sort of starting to feel the itch to do something different. And so those circumstances sort of conspired to create a feeling in me of, well, maybe this podcast thing has the potential to be my next chapter. I was really enjoying what I was doing. We were developing an audience. I got connected fortuitously with my business partner now, who is my podcast producer also, and a dear friend of mine. His name's Ryan Thrower. And we really discovered together how talented he is as a creative person. And, you know, my wife also brings a lot of great skills to our team. And we sort of had this slow realization that like we were really onto something new and different, and that our content was resonating with trail running fans. And we were trying to do something that at the time wasn't really in existence, doing sort of like deep analytical, technical commentary on this rapidly professionalizing sport. I grew up on ESPN here in the United States. I'm sure a lot of your listeners will know what ESPN is, but you know, it's the worldwide leader in sports. And I've always been a big fan of sports content and sports media. And just as important to me as the competition itself is the conversations that happen before and after that competition. I've always loved that like deep analysis about performance, and recognized an opportunity to sort of bring that to the trail running context. And we did have a lot of like learning, growing pains as we were trying to figure out who we are and what we do. We kind of started with a training app. We sort of fell into that opportunity and quickly realized that we're not like a training and coaching company as much as we are a media, content, storytelling, education, entertainment company. And so, you know, we had a rebranding process and ultimately arrived where we are now, which, as I described, is sort of omni-channel multimedia platform that also does a lot of events and race coverage and things like that. But to go back to your original question, yeah, Free Trail was sort of born in a moment of personal discomfort where I was coming off of major injury and at a point where I was really searching for what was going to be next for my career. I was also sort of emerging into my mid 30s as an athlete, and I think at least subconsciously recognizing that that wasn't going to go on forever and I was going to have to figure out what the next chapter was. And now I feel very confident that I know what that next chapter is, and it's Free Trail.
Magnificent. And what a leap of faith to take in terms of taking the plunge and the insecurity and all the feelings that must have came with that. But from being consumers, John and I being consumers of the content that you're producing, you know, if how we're receiving that is a reflection of how everybody else is, then well bloody done, because it's absolutely been a game changer for the sport, for ultramarathon, for the access to. It feels like a privilege, you know, catching up on the content that you're producing, because it used to be inaccessible, and you brought it to the masses, so to speak. So thanks from the bottom of our hearts for that. And I think we'll speak a wee bit later on about just how impressive the coverage is of, you know, likes of Western States UTMB as well. But yeah, Free Trail, it really has. You started 6 months before our podcast.
Yeah.
We also started the podcast because of COVID, and we speak often about all the bad things that happened because of COVID, but there was so much good came out of it as well, because it gave people this mind space to press the pause button and think about things. Sounds like that's what's kind of occurred with you.
Yeah, well, first of all, Stephen, thank you for saying that, man. I really do appreciate it. It means a lot to hear from people who do listen to the show and who do appreciate what we're trying to do in the sport. And it was a massive leap of faith for all of us, and it's been not without massive pain and sacrifice. And it feels like we're finally reaching a point of stability, but it was very hard earned. So I appreciate you saying that. But yeah, I mean, I think just going back to what you're saying, like in retrospect, yeah, you can't remove the sequence of events with the environment that was surrounding it, right? Like, yeah, I had broken my ankle and was kind of starting to think about this next step in my career. What breaking my ankle did was make me realize, okay, this is not going to go on forever. You really do need to figure out who you are outside of being a good athlete, which I think all pro athletes are confronted with that reality at some point. I was lucky, like I said, to have always had a career outside of sport too. And I feel like that always gave me a good balance and also kind of a good understanding, a good education about what business is and how you have to, you know, create a product that people want in the world. And then COVID was just this blank canvas of idle time to be creative and do different things. And it originally, I didn't even put out content on a consistent basis. And I was also doing things, covering things on the show that weren't specific to trail running, but just scratched some personal curiosity or some personal itch. And, you know, for example, my first ever podcast was with a friend of mine who's a master sommelier, who is like very well known in the world of wine, but who has nothing to do with trail and ultra running. And there's a few other sort of guests in those early days that map to that example where, you know, it was the podcast at the time was called The Well, and the homage was going to the well. And so the first idea was we were going to just have people on who in some way embody that idea of full commitment, going to the bottom of the well, right? And then, you know, it became clear, well, people know me because of trail running, and there is this space in the sport to provide what we do, which is more like commentary and analysis on the professional end of the race. And then sort of when COVID started to abate and racing started happening again, I think there was just kind of a hunger from the trail running world to like get back to it. And we were sort of at the forefront of people who were ready to get back to it also, and we're ready to share those stories. And so, yeah, again, yeah, COVID was awful for me. I'm a, massive extrovert, as I'm sure most people will assume who are familiar with who I am and what we do. But yeah, there were a lot of things that were made possible only because of the circumstances that created. So yeah, in hindsight, it's kind of wild to think that we are almost 5 years since the recording of my first podcast, but it still feels to me like we're in, the very early days of what we're creating here. And it really has only felt like in the last 2 years that we've really known what we're doing. And that clarity has been liberating for us to finally align on who we are, what we do, what impact we want to have. And so, yeah, again, to me, it feels like we're just getting started.
And during that time, Dylan, you also had a new arrival in the world as well, just to throw a curveball at you to contend with as well. So yeah, that there was that as well, and yeah, I was so chuffed for you and Harmony when that news broke. So
I know.
how's being a father? How's that fitted into your world?
Yeah. Do you guys have kids?
Yes.
Yeah. It's the greatest thing ever, as you guys know. Yeah. So my son, he'll turn 2 in just about a month. And we're at such a fun point right now where he's talking and every day he learns something new. I actually have this video that I'm going to post on my Instagram. So by the time this goes up, maybe it'll be up on my Instagram, of my son with one of my microphones, just, sort of shouting into it. And also he has one of our new white Free Trail bucket hats. And so the video is him shouting into the microphone and then putting it down and then putting the white bucket hat on and then picking up the microphone again and sort of shouting into it. And what it made me realize is just like that they really do watch and
Yeah.
learn everything. And it's funny because I just drove home from Hard Rock. So I had 2 days alone in the car. My wife and son flew to see grandma and grandpa in Oregon. And on the drive home, I saw a billboard that said, "Kids don't listen to your advice, they follow your example." And it hit me as a very profound fact, especially because we had just recorded this video, or my wife had just texted me this video of my son very clearly mimicking exactly what I do. Like he had watched me do it and he's like, "Oh, this is what daddy does." Even if he can't articulate that himself, it's kind of a profound realization of like, wait a sec, like he's watching everything I do. And so what it does is I think creates a feeling of obligation to do the right thing. I think that's the biggest thing that fatherhood has really taught me is like this human being is the next generation of humanity, right? And he is the biggest way that I can contribute to the world being a positive place in the future is to show him a good example because he follows the example. Going back to the billboard, kids don't follow your advice, they follow your example. And so that's just one thing that has been reinforced in my mind really recently is living by example. And I think that's a realization that was created by fatherhood.
In your the most recent episode I listened to just today, you're speaking to Courtney DeWalter after Hard Rock. And just to come back to thinking about your son, there was a part of that episode where you and Courtney discussed the step ladder. You were talking about the next generation of runners. And I think you said Courtney had signed some young dude's T-shirt in the front row. But what you've just described, as you say, is that next generation. That's also a step ladder, isn't it? It's the next people coming up. And this is my very loose segue into the next question I'm going to ask you, Dylan. And a lot of people, so children adore hero worship, parental figures and guardians. When we become adults ourselves, whether we call it that or not, but we get inspired by and we admire what people do. I'm thinking of people like Jasmine Paris and Courtney Dauwalter, who, when you were a kid, a young man, an athlete, who inspired you running wise?
Nobody inspired me running wise, because I didn't discover the sport until later. When I did get into running, Anton Krupicka was my idol, and I still somebody I'd look up to a lot. And the reason for that was because he was clearly fully committed, living in a truck, putting up ridiculously high training volume, and also competing at the highest level of the sport. And just his look, his vibe, his ethos of minimalism was something that resonated not only with me, but with thousands of people in that generation. I think it can't be overstated just what an impact he had on this massive growth curve that our sport has been on since his era. And yeah, aside from him, like I said, I've always been a massive fan of sports. And one athlete who was particularly impactful or influential to me was Craig Alexander, who's a 3-time Ironman Kona world champion. I think he's also won the 70.3 world championship twice. And what I loved about him was exactly this, right? They called him the pros pro. Like, not only was he competing at the top of the sport, the best in the world, but he's also a family man. You know, he's got 3 kids. He's married to his high school sweetheart. He always has this air of sportsmanship, professionalism that I always resonated with. Similarly, like someone like Roger Federer, somebody who has transcended his sport, who's taken tennis into a new audience and into a new generation, and who also like is very respected by even his toughest rivals. An example I used on my podcast at some point was when he announced his retirement last year, whatever time that was. His retirement speech is so moving. And the thing that touched me so much was Rafa Nadal, who was unquestionably his biggest rival for more than a decade, and who often got the better of Roger, but who during this retirement speech is just bawling like a child, like crying his eyes out. And I thought like that's really like what we should all aspire to, is to be the best at our craft, but also to have the respect of even the people who are quote unquote our competition. And so those are the types of people that I always looked up to. You know, I think, you know, Anton, Roger Federer, Craig Alexander all represented that in their own sports. And it's been something that I've always like tried to aspire to also, to like, you know, I'm never, you know, Roger Federer, that's like Courtney, you know, or Jim. I was never at that level. I had a good career and I'm proud of it. But, you know, what I care about more than my results at the end of the day when I look back at this is the relationships and friendships and, you know, hopefully respect that I've earned from the people that are in the sport.
Brilliant, great. Just thinking about that, you never saw Roger Federer, maybe another Scottish term, lose the plot. You know, he always calm, focus on, he's a very, very humble guy. As most of the good guys and gals are humble, you know, so brilliant example. Thank you very much for that. That response has got me thinking.
Was it? Whilst you're thinking, John, I'll jump on to another question. It's actually one about your own running career and its highs, and I'm sure the lows. You've already touched on that with the injury issues, and you know it doesn't take. There's no many when you speak to a group of runners that haven't went through some trials and tribulations on that front. But when you look back at your events that you've taken part in, whether it's because you've performed well or you've just enjoyed the experience, what are some of the career highs that are really sort of etched in your memory, Dylan?
Geez, it's becoming harder and harder to remember them all. But yeah, I don't know. I think there's a few like specific highs that I'm really proud of. The most recent one was the Hard Rock race in 2021. And it's funny because Hard Rock was just last weekend and made me just think like, shit, it's been 3 years since I've had a good race. Like, yeah, in that time I've really been focused on other things, but it does make you think, especially with just where the sport is going now, which it feels like the game has really changed forever, that it's sort of passing you by a little bit, which is fine, but you know, there is a bit of melancholy to it also. But that was a great memory for me, finishing second place and running one of the fastest times and finishing just behind Francois Den, who's another one of these athletes who I just really respect, admire, and look up to, and who's been an icon and legend in our sport. You know, I finished on the podium, the Western States 100. That was obviously like a career highlight for me. That was 10 years ago now, which is also hard to imagine. But the thing that I think I will be most proud of when I look back is my ability to compete across distances and terrains over a long period of time. Like I was lucky to have a pretty consistent career where there weren't a lot of massive lows, but there was just, and there weren't a lot of like massive highs, right? It wasn't like I was winning Western States, but I'm proud to have like finished on the podium of Western States and Trans Gran Canaria and the North Face 50 and Hard Rock and a lot of the top races in the world, and have longevity in that time too. And I think just being one of the guys who you'd think about, right? Like, yeah, there would be favorites in the race, but I would have hoped that in my prime, in those peak years, that even if I wasn't in the conversation as a favorite, I was somebody that the favorites were thinking about, of like, oh, you know, look out for Debo. If my thing was, if I had a good day, I could contend in most races at most distances on most terrains. And I just I took pride in that versatility and range. And so, yeah, more than just like spectacular highs, to me, the thing that I always aspired to was just consistency and dependability. And this is something that I always like, you know, I think served me well in my cultivation of strong partnerships and sponsorship relationships was that, you know, that, yeah, you know, when I was running for the North Face, yeah, Rob Krar was winning Western States, but like I was a solid guy, you know, they could depend on me. And I think that's something that's also translated into my business career too, is like I just take pride in being a dependable person who follows through on what he says he's going to do, and who hopefully over delivers on whatever the expectation is. So I don't know. That's maybe not a perfect answer to your question. I think there's a lot of amazing memories. I mean, I've done, I don't know, probably close to 80 ultra marathons. I've traveled all over the world, which is definitely a highlight of my life. And I was never a traveler growing up. Like my family didn't take us on international vacations. And now like my son's been to Europe already like 3 times. He's not even 2 years old. And so those sorts of things have been massive highs for me. Just the ability to build strong relationships that have served me not only as an athlete, but now in the business context, to see all 4 corners of the globe and then have these just really powerful life experiences that I'm proud of at the end of the day. Even if I wish there was a lot more wins on my resume. There's a few good ones, and those I'm really proud of. And the thing that I'm most proud of is just consistency, longevity, durability over time.
Thank you. I think that you've answered that question perfectly, and I think you're being humble in terms of you're competing at the sharp end of races, aren't you? And okay, yeah, you've got the mega stars, as we call them, who seem to be on one level up again or whatever like that. But yeah, you look back, a wee resume of your career, and most mortals would absolutely bite your hand off to have some of the accolades on your CV. So yeah, thank you, Dylan. That was I think you mentioned you ran for Team North Face. I can't remember their official name.
Yeah.
And Rob was, it's like, in the Tour de France, how you've got your team and they all work as a team though together and spur each other on to another level, but then they maybe shoot forward their main guy at the end to win the stage, but they're all participating. When you're competing in a team like that, is there a similar mentality that you're competing on race day, but up until race day, you're actually helping each other, giving each other a leg up, in training and
It's funny because I was having this conversation with my friend Andrew Bumbelow, who's a former professional marathon and track athlete. He was on the Bowerman Track Club, sponsored by Nike for his entire professional running career. He now works at Nike as a product leader in the footwear space. And he was making the comment that in track and road racing, there is more of a feeling of team and allegiance across or segmented in the brands. In other words, if you run for Nike, there's like a feeling of being a teammate. And I felt that has been mostly absent from trail running until recently. And I think the brand that's doing it the best is probably Adidas, just creating a feeling of friendship and camaraderie within the team. That being the case, though, I don't think it's like cycling in any way where people are kind of working together in races to try and push each other forward based on their brand allegiance. The thing that makes trail running amazing, as we know, is that friendship transcends brand, right?
yeah.
Friendship is trail running. And so, I don't think a North Face athlete would have any problems working together with somebody who's sponsored by Hoka, for example. And yeah, maybe they are closer with their North Face athletes, their fellow North Face athletes, because of the fact that they do shared activities or do athlete retreats or summits or training camps. But yeah, I don't know. I think, as I said, that hasn't really become a phenomenon in trail running. I think for the better. I think it's great that there are now so many brands who are active and investing in our sport, and athletes now for the first time, I think, are able to make like a really healthy living in the sport, especially those at the highest level. But yeah, we're definitely not seeing things that create an adversarial environment between brands and the athletes who are contracted with those individual brands.
No, thanks for that. I agree with you. I think I agreed with you. I was nodding away there when you were chatting, Dylan. And the thought of having, almost a competitive inter-team environment, was a silly one of mine, that thought. But at the same time, it was just more having been involved in the actual, inner team. How did it feel?
No,
But
I
you
don't
answered
think
the
it's a
question.
silly question. I think I know for a fact it's something that people from the brand level think about,
Yeah.
is arriving at a race like Western States or UTMB and having it feel like, Team UAE does
Mhm.
at Tour de France. So everybody wearing the same kit, having group runs, brand activations, having a physio and a chalet that's dedicated just to the athletes. And that I think is very cool. Like that, I think is something that is professionalizing the sport and creating the conditions for the athletes to feel totally bought in. And that is creating also the circumstances that has led to just the rewriting of every record book, as we've seen in recent years. But that is not really translated onto the race course, whereby
Yeah.
the brands are sort of competing with one another, that athletes feel an allegiance to their teammates more so than they do to themselves.
Yeah, I just imagine Jim Walmsley. Jim, part of a team. 2 miles to go, mate. Sack that. Also, you mentioned Rob Cryer. I remember Rob Cryer. There was a video. This is Your Day, it was called. It was about
Yeah.
Rob Cryer running Western States. People listening in, if you have not seen that, go and watch that. It's an amazing film. But Rob Cryer in 2015 ran Western States in 1448. Sorry, Dylan, this is us segueing into Western States now. The first 5 male finishers this year were faster than that time in 2015. The sixth finisher, Jonathan Albon, was only 9 minutes outside of that as well. So things are changing. And you mentioned as well, Dylan, used the term, you're a over-deliverer. I think for the last 3 or 4 years, every year about this time, Stephen, or a month ago, Stephen and I talk about Western States and how the coverage is getting better every year. And one year we said, what they need is drones. Fucking hell, here come the drones. And then they were there. And it was, you're taking us to places that previously were inaccessible. And I've really loved you talking about how you and your company have come, the way you've thought about things creatively coming out of the pandemic. There were opportunities there, but and the hunger for more information was there. The hunger for ultra running has exploded in Europe and the same in America, but you've given us that insight into what's happening. Where I'm going with this, can you talk about how you've seen that evolve in the last 4 or 5 years, that Western States experience? Can you speak about that?
Sure. So the first year we did the broadcast at Western States was 2021. Billy Yang had just been elected to the board of directors of Western States. And I think part of his vision in this new role was to create this viewing experience. Billy still operates as the leader of the whole broadcast. And at that time, he reached out to myself and Corrine Malcolm with the assignment to do the commentary for the race that year. And we were just talking about this at Western States, remembering the first year and how far we've come. And in the first year, there was no crew access allowed at Robinson Flat. So, or what was it? It was something like that. Like the first real opportunity to get cameras on the athletes was not until Michigan Bluff, mile 55. And somehow Corrine and I were able to fill 8 hours of time with, very little camera footage or updates, altogether. And still, that remains a highlight of my entire life, that first broadcast in 2021. It just felt like I sat down in the chair, they turned on the cameras, working with Corrine, who I've just developed this great chemistry with. It felt like we had discovered exactly what we were meant to do in life, right? The two of us. I'm sure Corrine would probably describe it a similar way. And the response was incredible. I mean, I heard from what felt like hundreds of people who are like, I expected to watch for 30 minutes and I was glued for 12 hours, And that's the type of stuff where it's just, and I felt the same way. Like I felt totally consumed in the moment, total flow state, just taking my responsibility to package and deliver the story of the Western States to a global audience. It just felt second nature to me. And it still remains, as I said, a highlight of my life and my career. And over the last 4 years, we've gotten better and better each time. This year, I think, was head and shoulders better than our broadcast in 2023 or either year before that. And, what I always say is that, frankly, we have the easy jobs on those broadcasts, right? Like Corrine and I, this is again second nature to us, and it feels like flow state fun, even if we're sitting there for 20 hours. And like I don't ever feel bored or fatigued or like I need a break. It's like by the time the top 10 women come through and we sign off, like I have more energy than when I started. And I think that's just an indication that like you're doing something important, you're doing something that you were kind of predisposed to do. And again, I think Corrine would say the same thing about herself. And I can't say enough about how much I love working with her. So again, yeah, we have the easy jobs. There's a massive team behind the scenes. And because we're on camera or our voices are being featured, I think Corrine and I get a disproportionate amount of kudos for the way those broadcasts evolve. But it starts with Billy. This year we worked with Mountain Outpost as our broadcast partner. So Jamil Curry and his team, who have really revolutionized the art of trail running live streaming. And aside from, and you know, of course, they bring a team of dozens of people. And then there's also, importantly, a number of volunteers who have their iPhones on gimbals. There's one guy named Dan Davis who puts in like a 50K every year, just running back and forth from the track to Roby Point and just running with people, with finishers all the way to the track. And so again, like, I don't know, it's just one of these things that's an example of the beauty of the trail running community of like, what a great opportunity to share this insanely awesome event that everybody wants to do, that takes forever to get into, but that everybody can experience digitally, even if they can't be there in person. And what makes that possible is a team of competent, qualified, passionate people who are selfless at the end of the day. You know, like nobody's getting rich off the Western States broadcast, you know, like it's truly something that exists based on the passion of the people who work on it.
Brilliant.
It does come across as a true labor of love. But the fact that the people who are part of that team know the sport, know the pinch moments, know where to point their cameras at, because that's where I want the camera to be pointed as a enthusiast of the sport. And you can tell the way it comes across. You're right, that time where you were sat, you and Corrine, speaking, and you were getting updates, obviously, on probably messages and WhatsApp or whatever, saying so and so. I was like that. I'll put this on, and you know, it's obviously a time difference for us, so it's a different time of day. And then my wife said to me, "What are you watching? You've been there for like 2 hours." And I'm like, "This is important. This is like the Super Bowl I'm watching, you know." And it's just you chatting, and it's engrossing. But since then, and how it's evolved, and being able to get to these mythical places that, you know, we look at the names and, you know, Michigan Bluff, Rucky Chucky, and we're like, oh, that's what's entrancing John and I to at some point in our lives to make the trip across, just to be in the Disney World park. It feels like, if you know what I mean. But I don't think I can understate how much that evolution of what the output is now compared to what it was is helping just open the eyes to the sport for people in Scotland, the UK, and Europe. And then, similarly, UTMB, you've made a trip over there as well a few times, which we'll get to. Western States this year, there was a point in time, I think it was just coming up to Rucky Chucky, and Jim had fallen slightly behind. Yeah, I was watching that. I was like fixated on it, and I'm like, he's playing a game here. He's just doing this to tease. I don't know who it was, but it was the river crossing. When we were both in the river crossing at the same time, John and I were texting each other bananas, going, they're in the river, they're both in the river, they're not getting swept away, etc., etc. You've brought all that to us, and it's magnificent. John,
I've got a 2 points on one question, 2 questions about it. And I agree, this year was brilliant. The guys that were going for second and third Rhodes and Hayden Hawks on the track at the same time. Quite brilliant television. It is television. I was watching it. And then, but I'm delighted that I know the name Dan Davis. I see that guy running about crazy, you know. There's guys going up and down the track as well. My two questions though are: do they sell the finisher shirt? Because that is one of the coolest shirts I've ever seen in my life. It's like this Hawaiian thing. I absolutely love it. And the other thing is a question I want you to speak about, a guy who you spoke about in your build-up, and that's Ryan Thrower. Can you say something and tell that for people who are listening in, they've never heard the name Ryan Thrower. They've never really heard about Western States. Can you just talk about that a wee bit? But first of all, how do we get a shirt?
I think you got to earn those shirts. I don't think they sell them. I don't know. You'd have to check with the people at Hoka. Maybe they're on the website. I'm not sure, but
Ryan Thrower,
they are very cool. They are very cool, those finisher shirts. And they're actually functional too. Like you can go for a run in them. You can wear them to the bar. Yeah, they're cool. Ryan Thrower is my dear friend and business partner, co-founder of our business, Free Trail. He is the creative force behind everything that we do. He produces all of our podcasts, including mine. He takes all the photographs that you see on our Instagram. He makes incredible videos, whether they're simple few-minute like race highlight videos or training advice videos or feature-length documentaries. And he has been an amazing partner, and we've built this thing side by side in a way that, you know, has built this incredible bond between the two of us, and that's allowed us both to discover our unique gifts as human beings, right? Like, as I said, that initial Western States broadcast was sort of a moment where I was like, wait, I feel like this is like, even if it's a silly, obnoxious skill to have, like this is something that I can do. I can just sit here and talk about sports for 20 hours straight, you know? And maybe there's some value in that skill. And Ryan picked up a camera for the first time in 2019. And I think has quickly become one of the most talented creative people out there. You know, there aren't many people who can do what he does across audio, video, photography. He created our brand logo. So, you know, he does at least some rudimentary graphic design too. He's just a brilliant creative person who has always had the attitude of, I don't know how to do this, but I can figure it out. And I've sort of had that same attitude too in what I do. And together, bringing those two attitudes to building our business together, it just feels like there's nothing we can't do together, you know? And he also had the honor of running the Western States 100 this year. So in the lead up to the race, we were talking a lot about it and just basically sharing our excitement about the fact that Ryan had his opportunity. He was pulled 32nd on the wait list, and I think it only went 34 deep. So he only narrowly got in. And he had a tough race. Things kind of got out of control. His knees started hurting him around halfway, but he was never lost the determination to get to the finish line. And so what happened was, after I signed off of the broadcast, I was able to take like a 45-minute nap, and then I went out to the Pointed Rocks aid station, and I got to do the last 5 miles with Ryan as his pacer. And of course we were moving slow and he was hurting bad, but it was just like, it was a great just moment of camaraderie, right? You know, this guy who you've shared so much with and is the only person aside from my wife who knows like how hard we've worked to create what we've created, and just like the silent connection that creates between two people. And then to just like go out onto the Western States course and walk the last 5 miles with him, just like cracking jokes. And it's so funny. Like I remember just hiking up to Roby Point with him and just being like, isn't this crazy? Like, it feels like we're just out for a walk or out for a hike, but this is Western States. We're finishing right now. Like, this is incredible. So anyway, you know, I love him. He's a dear friend, and the hardest working guy in the game, and without whom, you know, none of this would would be possible. So anyway, that's Ryan. He's a great dude and a very, very talented person.
I hope he listens into this and hears what the nice words. I hope you tell him that anyway, because it's obvious you do love him, which is really nice. And I just looked at the Free Trail YouTube, and you're now at 20,000 plus listeners, and that was the campaign, wasn't it?
Yeah. So for your listeners, we had a fun little joke that was spontaneous on our Western States coverage that if we hit 20,000 subscribers, Ryan was going to win the race. I think we got to like 19,300. So we were well short of it, but yeah, we just cracked that number. So when I noticed that, I texted Ryan and, yeah, basically we've determined that he's going to win Western States next year now. So.
we should say he did it in 26 hours, 6 minutes, which is
Yeah.
a fantastic performance. So well done, Ryan. Yeah.
Very, very solid. His goal was to go under 24. He would have easily done that if his knee hadn't given him trouble halfway, but because he was like clearly limping at the end and he's sort of felt a little bit banged up and injured ever since, but he's getting back to it now. But yeah, 26 hours, certainly something to be really proud of.
Definitely got it done.
Definitely. And then last weekend, you mentioned earlier, it was Hard Rock 100, and you were there in a voluntary capacity. We had a friend running it, somebody who's been on the podcast, a local Scottish guy called Derek Fish, and his little support team were out there, and I saw a photo on their socials with you at the aid station. How was that experience from the volunteer side of things?
It was very cool. So to give a little background to your listeners, I did the Hard Rock 100 last year going in the opposite direction. And at mile 82, stumbled into the Chapman aid station, having been suffering badly for hours and determined to quit. And spent 3 hours in the aid station. And ultimately, an aid station captain who I've gotten to know now very well in the last year basically refused to allow me to quit. And in that time gave me the belief that I could actually make it to the finish line if I chose to. So after the 3-hour break, I reconsidered my determination to quit. And with my pacer, Rich Lockwood, stumbled out of that aid station and 6, 7, 8 hours later, made it back to Silverton and kissed the rock and got my second finish at Hard Rock. And it was one of those powerful moments in my career where it just like made me feel like I need to give back and do more. And like I said, Bill, the aid station captain, and I are good friends now after that experience. And I made it clear to him I wanted to come back and help. I wanted to come back and volunteer at Chapman. And this year the course goes in the opposite direction. So Chapman was very early, only 18 miles into the run, but it was so fun to be there and to play my part in the experience of this year's class of hard rockers and fill up water bottles and get plates of quesadillas and, even help people with their equipment and footwear and stuff like that. It was just great. And it made me realize, I should be doing that more. Like, it's just fun. They call it volunteering, which makes it seem like this noble thing. And it is, it is like somewhat of a selfless way to contribute to the sport, but it's also like genuinely fun, like it can be hard work. And I'm sure it's much harder in the other direction when there's much bigger gaps between the runners and people who are coming in are in much worse shape just by virtue of the fact that it comes at mile 82 instead of mile 18. But it was genuinely a very, very fun day there at the Chapman aid station. It was great to be a part of it.
Brilliant. I know certainly from Derek's, as Steve mentioned, Derek, his social media has been fantastic the last week. There's been Derek and Gav Bussey and Greg Stevenson have been across, and Derek's girlfriend, Sarah, as well. Quite phenomenal. And it's just great to see people we know experiencing these experiences. So as a volunteer, thank you for being there and helping them out. That's absolutely awesome.
That's an honor.
Aware of timings, and we've got you for a limited time, Dylan. What's next for Dylan Bowman?
Well, This afternoon, I'm flying to Utah. We'll be doing some stuff around the speed goat races here in the US. And then I'm going to be home for 3 weeks, which is going to
Wow.
feel nice. Yeah. I'm thinking about doing a race in Washington State called the Backcountry Rise 50K, which is in mid-August. Still TBD whether I'm going to be able to do it, but it's put on by Daybreak Racing, who are our partners on our 2 race events, the Gorge Waterfalls and the Big Alta. So I will potentially be running there. I'm trying to see if I can get into MCC at UTMB. We will definitely be at UTMB, and we are going to be going hard on the coverage and content side of things. We'll be doing our daily show there. We'll be doing athlete interviews. And again, sort of as we did last year at UTMB and as we did this year at Western States, just basically bringing breakfast from Wimbledon to trail running, or in the US, the better comparison is like College Game Day. Just bringing like a daily show that adds color to what's happening on the ground to help share the story of the UTMB with a global audience. If we can, I'd like to do MCC so that I can maybe get one adventure in during a week of a lot of work. And then after that, I'm thinking about doing the UTMB Nice 100K in October. So I don't know. My relationship with racing has evolved now. Clearly I'm not at the same level. I'm not training like I used to, but I'm more open-minded to just going to do stuff without a performance expectation, and reconnecting with the love of just getting out there and doing it, and not being embarrassed that I'm not at the same level that I used to be, but actually embracing it. And like, I don't know, being proud of it, honestly.
You ever been to Scotland?
No, I want to though. I want to. I need to come visit you guys. I got to come see my buddy Doug. And,
Bring it in, man. Just bring it in. Next
yeah.
June. Come next June. Do the West
It's
Highland Way race.
West Highland Way race. Yeah, it's
I
the
think
one
it
for
was like,
you.
yeah, I'd like to do that one. I've heard great things about it. I mean, that's an old historic event. The problem is that it's on the same weekend as Western States.
True.
They got to
Is it the
move
weekend before?
Is it?
Yeah.
21st of
Well,
June
maybe.
next year.
Yeah, it's the
Oh, well,
weekend
that's
before. The
okay.
longest
Well, that's
day, and it falls on the weekend of our longest day of daylight hours.
yeah. Okay.
So
Just
it's hardly ever dark. It's
yeah,
like
just don't
dark for
rule it
maybe
out. Don't rule it out.
dark for an hour. You don't
It's
even need a head
tempting.
torch. You'd love it. In fact, I noticed on his Strava that Billy Yang is in Scotland at the moment.
Really?
Yeah, he's in. I noticed him yesterday. Ran a race. He done a run in the Isle of Skye, which is all kinds of beautiful and gorgeous. So lucky Billy. There you go. I was like,
Very
going
cool.
to say, you're going to come and run down. We stay in the central area of Scotland. Equally as picturesque, isn't it, John?
If not better.
If not better, of course, of course.
Right.
So yeah, go for it.
I was going to say 2 questions left because of Dylan's time. On you
2
go.
questions, and they're important ones, Dylan. Ones that we put a lot of emphasis on. The first one is a entry into our Young Hearts Run Free dialect dictionary, which is a word or phrase, something that you've picked up along the way, maybe one that you used when you were younger, one that your mum shouted at you. I don't know.
Sure. I'm a big fan of niche vocabulary. I hadn't put a lot of thought into this, but one word that I love to use is the word mate. And this is something that Americans don't really use, but that
Okay.
Aussies, Kiwis, I think, Brits often use to just signal friendship.
Mhm.
And there's something about the word that's different than like bro or buddy or dude or whatever. Like, if you say hey mate to somebody, I don't know, there's like a feeling of friendship and respect inherent. And I think it's a word that English speaking Americans should adopt. Some good running words: seconding, which the South Africans use instead of crewing. So if you go to like Ultra Trail Cape Town, they're like, hey, do you have help seconding during the race? So that's a fun evolution of crewing. I'm trying to think of maybe some other. The Aussies always have good sayings, So, or the Kiwis, sweet as is a good one. Like that's sweet as, meaning, oh, that's cool. That's the best I can come up with right now.
Hey,
But
man,
those are a few good
we
examples.
only asked you for one. You are an
Yeah.
over deliverer.
I know. And John just used our equivalent of mate there, which is man. So we'll put,
Yeah.
hey man.
Yeah.
That's a real Scottish term.
Yes.
It's a real John term.
Stephen's
Yeah.
wife always knows when he spent time with me because everything's man afterwards. So,
What are you
Yeah.
saying, man?
yeah, thank you. I like mate as well. Scottish, we use another word for a term of endearment, but we're not going to say it on this episode just now.
Different
I know
connotation.
I know exactly what you're referencing. Yeah.
Yeah. But our last question for you, Dylan, is a musical one, and it's a song that means something to you that you can share with our listeners. We've got every season we do a playlist, and we're currently on playlist 8 because we never started it till season 3. So there you go. But what song or track would Dylan Bowman like to share with the Young Hearts Run Free listeners?
Okay. I have two. I have to admit that I'm not a big music person. Obviously, I'm a podcast person. But my childhood favorite song is All Along the Watchtower by Bob Dylan. I was named after Bob Dylan. And of course, the more famous version of the song is Jimi Hendrix cover of All Along the Watchtower. But Bob Dylan, I think, is the consummate artist and poet, and that particular song, for whatever reason, touched me. And then the song between my wife and I is Tracy Chapman's Fast Car, which is just the most heartbreaking, beautiful love song that has actually also become repopularized recently. There's a famous country artist whose name I can't remember right now, but who's been singing it on tour and who did sort of a duet with Tracy Chapman recently that was popular on the internet. But this is a song that's connected my wife and I that we played. It was the last song at our wedding, and that we turn on every once in a while when we want to get feel sentimental and emotional in our partnership. So those are two that you can add.
Is it Luke Combs? He
Luke
did.
Combs, I think that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, both brilliant tracks. They'll both definitely go in the playlist. But we always have one that's going to fade in as we fade you out on the audio version. And I think Tracy Chapman fits that one.
Yeah.
Definitely. What a tune. Thank you so much. Dylan, another wee thing that's in the back of my mind is I would love to know the ideas lying around on the cutting room floor that's fell out of your brain that you've never used yet, because you seem to be such a creative person and they've got all these things that are just there. Great ideas. Maybe I'm biased. I don't care if I am, but I've loved all the stuff that you've done. So thank you so much for the time that you've shared with us. I'm going to leave that door open for you to come back in because we've got
I would
lots
love
more.
to.
Yeah, we've got lots more questions. We could have a Dylan Bowman season, I think. We could do that. We could do that. But I'm going to cut this short for me. I'm going to let Stephen come in and say a final cheerio. But thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed your company. Thank you, Dylan.
Thank you, John.
No, just quickly, Dylan, it's been a real honour to get to speak to you. You've been in my ears lots over the last 5 years, trust me. Like I say, I think I've made it quite clear that I'm quite the fan of what you and your team, the team do. Yeah, that being the emphasis on that. But what I think comes over loud and clear is that, especially when you're talking about your racing and how it's evolved, and now you're racing for different reasons, and your relationship with racing is around about the experience rather than the competing part, and the meeting people and the relationships. And that is the loud and clear message that I've got from Dylan Bowman, is that racing was maybe the motivation to begin with, but the byproduct being the relationships is where the magic has happened for you. And it's been brilliant for us to get to speak to you, for you to give us that message. And I'm sure our listeners are going to absolutely be over the moon with this episode. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, John. And yeah, I'll come up to Scotland. And the next time we do this, we do a live pod from a pub near a trailhead. How's that sound, boys?
Oh man,
All right.
up to high dough. Awesome.
All
mate.
right.
Brilliant.